Jacksonville. The child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history, this land of flowers.
The Weekmet was from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Our date for this episode is the 17th of August 2019. An interesting week that has passed by, or at least most of the week. We started this week off with an 800-point drop at the stock market. It had dropped the most this year, and many of the factors in the economy reminiscent of 2009. In the heart of the Depression, very interesting situation. We'll have more on the economy, including what's going on in farm country on the numbers man side this week in economics. That will play out this weekend also, and we also recommend that you tune in to one of our episodes, the Al Franken, the Case of Injustice, about what happened with Senator Franken, and now also Senator Franken has a podcast, and we'll have to put that link up for you, and we'll get it up there. And in the sports arena, I should say, we have a situation where an extraordinary amount of home runs have been hit this season, 2019, and a number of triples there, and we'll have to investigate a little bit and find out what is happening. And in the NFL, there's an agreement between something called Rock Nation, which is the brainchild of one Jay-Z, and the NFL was introduced by Jay-Z and Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL. A lot of confusion about that. Some people, the majority of the people that I've read there, are upset about it. And in the middle of it is the man that created the boycott, Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick, of course, at one time was very close to Jay-Z. And no doubt they had words about this situation. There is a lot of money involved in it, and what the idea is, according to Jay-Z, is to further the NFL's program for equality, for justice out there, justice-type programs where I'm assuming the NFL and company would engage with communities of color, and particularly with African Americans, and with municipal governments, etc., to bring about programs that foster de-escalation, etc., and focus on police brutality. People will no doubt monitor that to see what happens there. And in addition, from the Super Bowl halftime show, also various other events at NFL games around the nation. There's always various interludes there where entertainers entertain during or before the game. So, in other words, the NFL, like any sport, is an entertainment venue, and they realize that there are other venues out there that are coming also that compete against them: the NBA, Major League Baseball, and now soccer in many states, or football, whatever you want to call it, across the U.S. There are these teams. They draw an average of 15 to 20,000 per game, which is as good as some NFL teams do, and of course some Major League Baseball teams. That is the economics of sport, and we'll be talking more about that on All About Sports. That is one of our episodes. You don't see much of it, unfortunately, because we've been so busy with the political season. But we have on this particular episode, Uncle Carl Rope. He is writing in the Wall Street Journal on the 15th of August, and it's about the former Attorney General Eric Holder urging judges to vote Democratic. Very interesting situation at its best, I should say. And we have Amy Walter talking about the Charlie Cook. Charlie Cook evidently drove 500 miles around Iowa and talked to people and looking at the landscape there and which candidates are moving up, which are staying the same. He pointed out Elizabeth Warren as one that has been moving up, and that's an interesting situation. We'll have more on that when we get to it. And there's also the standoff, continued demonstrations in Hong Kong, which is part of China, and there are some discourse there in terms of there was exposition. I get it right in a minute. Law that with certain cases would be referred to the courts in the People's Republic of China in itself, in the mainland as they call it. And Carrie Lam, who is the administrator there, appointed by the People's Republic of China, was under fire for bringing it up. It was withdrawn, or table. We use the word table. The commercial media says withdrawn. It's actually not been totally withdrawn. It's been basically placed on the table. An old term that you hear or used to hear when you studied political parties, particularly as it pertained to the U.S. Congress. Committees would lay things on the table, etc. So it is laid on the table and there, and now it's the demonstrations are broader, in a broader context of various other types of liberties, privileges, etc. That could be introduced into the society. Now that is happening in many, many places. There are demonstrations in the Russian Federation at one time. The demonstrations that went on in France, the Gilets Jaunes movement in France, the so-called Yellow Vests there, and they were demonstrating there. So you see demonstrations in Brazil against Bolsonaro and his fascist government there, and various other demonstrations around the globe. And these demonstrations are progressive causes. Now, part of the confusion with China, you talk about the monopoly press in the U.S. and the BBC, etc., talk about these democracy demonstrations. Well, one of the big problems, of course, with Hong Kong is a very, very expensive city. It has been business-centric, and it is the engine. It was the engine before it was reunited with China 20 years ago. But it's basically about business with its skyscrapers, etc. The airport was closed for 2 days. Now the airport is reopened. So that particular ball will be hit back and forth as you serve a tennis ball there. And it has to be a political solution in the final analysis, one way or the other, in China. And on the other front, two representatives Representative Omar from Minnesota, and Representative Tbilisi out of Detroit, Michigan. We're going this weekend to have a fact-finding session in the Zionist state, and including, of course, the West Bank and these occupied territories. They at first were received, they would get visas to enter, and then DJ Trump convinced the reactionary Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu to cancel those. And then came another situation on so-called humanitarian grounds. Representative Tbilisi was to visit her 90-year-old grandmother, and she later rejected that. And of course, we'll talk a little about the grandmother. And the grandmother, of course, supports the boycott. So evidently, Mrs. Tbilisi didn't raise any fools, and that situation goes on. And the situation within the, as the Washington Post called it, a toxic rip opens within the Democratic Party. Well, the problem with the Democratic Party is they have embraced Wilsonian foreign policy, named after the racist Woodrow Wilson, since Woodrow Wilson was around. And that in itself has to change. The boycott against the Zionist state of Israel is a boycott fashioned after the anti-apartheid boycott. I can remember that very vividly, where we boycotted South Africa. And at the time, Reagan favored South Africa. The boycott eventually had a build up to that in the divestiture movement, and eventually it drove the racists out of Pretoria. So once again, these things do have a way of doing things. Let's first go to Uncle Carl in his article here. It's titled, Eric Holder urges judges to vote Democratic. Most U.S. Attorney Generals avoid partisan politics after leaving office. That's not the case with Eric Holder. In 2016, Holder, who headed the Justice Department under Barack Obama from 2009-2015, formed the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, ostensibly to combat gerrymandering. In reality, it was a power play. According to Uncle Carl, the nation's former chief law enforcement officer wanted to guarantee that Democrats control redistricting in 2021, when states redraw their congressional and state legislative districts after the next census. Holder argues that gerrymandering does more than give one party an advantage. He claims to find a direct connection between gerrymandering and voter suppression. There's no doubt about that. This is not a so subtle accusation that Republican GOP legislators who drew lines in 2011 where racist is a standard talking point for Mr. Holder, who raised $35 million through the NDRC and affiliates in 2018 to elect Democratic governors, legislatures, and Supreme Court justices. Organizing for America, an influential group created by President Obama, also contributed to its valuable fundraising lists to aid Holder's efforts. The organization plans to focus on 12 states in 2020, with special emphasis on Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas. Those are pivotal states. Texas being the most pivotal state, as it turns more blue. The Republicans have problems ahead, and so is Georgia. Florida is a state that they need. As this week there was an order from a judge, and Florida is coming with new voting machines that will literally give you a little slip of paper like you get from an ATM, literally when you vote. But now, this time around, the election is coming up this fall, they will not have that ready, and they wanted to have it ready before 2020, but the state of Florida is pushing to have it ready for the Florida primary, which I believe is in March of 2020. But no paper ballots there. But in 2020, if there's a problem with the new voting machines, there will be paper ballots there to count. And Stacey Abrams is leading a multi-state voter project also. She ran for governor of Georgia and was robbed literally in Georgia by Kemp, the Secretary of State. North Carolina is a state that Barack Obama carried. He also carried Ohio, and he carried Florida. So it's nothing new there, and the Democratic Party know that they will have to do that. Holt is not the only one trying to elect more Democrats. He's also mounting court challenges to redistricting plans, drawing on the works of the University of Chicago law Professor Nicholas Stephanopoulos, I hope that's right, and the Public Policy Institute of California's Eric McGee, and their concept of wasted votes. Wasted votes are those that don't help elect a candidate. Either ballots cast for losing candidates or surplus ballots cast for the victor after he's already received enough votes to win. The theory in the latter instance is that a large majority of victories waste votes that could have been cast for another candidate of the same party in a nearby district that had the lines drawn differently. Stephanopoulos and McGee calculated what they called the efficiency gap by adding up the differences between each side's wasted votes across all districts and dividing it by the total turnout. A result of 0 would reflect a completely fair, nonpartisan map. The theory holds for state legislatures a gap of less than 7 indicates a district was fairly drawn, while a value above 7 demonstrates gerrymandering. For Congress, the threshold of an average value greater than 2 divided by the total number of state houses. Anyway, we'll have to have more on this. Appreciative of Uncle Carl to bring this up. Even old Uncle Carl sometimes bats one in the infield. Court challenges to Republican pass redistricting in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and other states. Holders organization offered the efficiency gap as a prima facie evidence of gerrymandering, then burdened the court under a mountain of maps with smaller efficiency gaps, arguing that any would be fairer than what the GOP legislature drew. The political scientists Deron Shaw, the University of Texas, Austin, and John Pickside, anyway, of the University of Missouri, raised questions about Holder's favorite theory. They point out its arbitrariness, what's magic about 7, what is a 6-point gap fair and an 8-point gap unfair. For Congress, the ad hoc adjustment is puzzling. We'll have to work more on this. The efficiency gap is also extremely volatile, depending entirely on the way in which election is the baseline. The same map could swing from fair to gerrymandering from election to election. For example, using Wisconsin in 2018 election results, and the efficiency gap is 29 favoring Republicans, but using the state's 2014 results, it is 8, still too damn high. Using Maryland's 2018 result, and the efficiency gap is favoring the Democrats. Using the 2014, it is 19. Very interesting situation there. Let's go to the toxic rip here. This is from the Washington Post. This is by Matt Visa and Rachel Blade on the 16th of August. A politically explosive fight over Israel's attempt to block 2 members of Congress from entering the country at the urging of DJ Trump have elevated rips between it and the Democrats, who increasingly start to view the Zionist government and its leaders as out of line or in the eyes of at least 2 presidential candidates racist. The shift in dialogue has been accelerated by the tight embrace between DJ Trump, and that's not unusual. And Bibi Netanyahu, after a dazzling 48 hours, some Democrats are openly discussing the reconsideration of foreign aid to the Zionists. The dispute has fractured bipartisan support for the Zionist state and moved debate over into partisan space, more typically home issues such as abortion, gun control, and immigration. Well, it's very, very important because they all point to the same thing, period. There is a tectonic shifting of one of the fundamental plates of American politics. That is from Jeremy Ben Amen, the president of J Street, a liberal pro-Zionist group. There's been a plank of the rule book for 60 years, and that's what we call Wilsonian foreign policy. They are shifting in a really important way. The situation also puts many Democratic lawmakers in an awkward position of defending colleagues they find politically toxic while rebuking a country they support. It's complicated month-long effects by congressional Democrats to distance themselves. And this is editorializing here from Ilhan Omar and Rashina Tlaib, and repair some of the damage flowing from accusations they were anti-Israel, no doubt about that, and causing Representative the case of Omar made anti-Semitic remarks, and so has DJ Trump. Trump has worked to portray these members of Congress as the face of the Democratic Party, but his extreme action urging allies to bar two members of Congress from entering has forced many Democrats to defend the representatives. The only person who won and got what they want was DJ Trump. No one else was happy about it. That is from Aaron Kiak, a Democratic strategist again that works with Zionist groups. This is exactly what Trump wants, he adds, and in the meantime it is hurting the support for things the so-called pro-Zionist community most care most about. For decades, the Zionists held a special place in American politics with almost universal support. It doesn't happen anymore. Bernie Sanders, a principal politician, has been one of the most outspoken recent critics of the Zionists and has suggested withholding of foreign aid. He's labeled the country as, I dare say, a racist, the same description from fellow candidates Beto O'Rourke used for Netanyahu himself. If Israel doesn't want members of the Congress to visit their country, maybe they can respectfully decline the billions of dollars given to them. The past few days have also jumbled a month-long strategy on the part of Speaker Pelosi and her leadership team to try to emphasize the Democrats are friends of the Zionists after months of accusations by the president they were not. Omar first sparked an uproar back in February, and Trump attempted to suggest all Democrats are anti-Jewish and cast Republicans as their only true allies. That is a very interesting statement in itself, that the Republican Party, endorsed by white supremacists, could be their allies. Steny Hoyer, he's from Maryland, one of the staunchest reporters of the Zionists in the House, also made good on a promise to hold a vote on a resolution condemning the anti-Zionist Israeli boycott, despite strong First Amendment objections from liberals. The measure passed 398 to 17 on the 23rd, just days before Hoyer had led a historically large delegation of freshman types to the Zionist state, and they were not blocked from being there. But old Steny Hoyer is definitely out of state, out of step. This matter is a self-inflicted wound by one of America's close allies and one of our closest friends. How could that be? Hoyer said in a statement, his second such remark in 24 hours, President Trump urging of such actions and the implementation were and are unacceptable. He supposedly pled with Netanyahu to allow the representatives to enter, and they tried to restrict that. Anyway, as many of our colleagues have stated, in 24 hours, we give the Zionists more than $3 billion in aid each year. This is predicated on their being an important ally in the region and the only democracy. Now, that is an absolute lie. Denying visas to duly elected members of Congress is not consistent with either an ally or a democracy. No doubt about that. We should be leveraging that aid to stop settlements and encourage the full rights of a Palestinian people. Let's see. This is Representative Omar speaking, and numerous Democrats say they worry about the long-term effects of politicizing the relationship between the U.S. and the Zionists. In the interview, Josh Goffenmeyer, he's from New Jersey, a vocal defender of Israel who, like Sanders, is Jewish. Obviously, Bernie is Jewish. Ticked off a range of policy ramifications should colleagues start to view the Zionists as negative. This is the greatest recipient of a U.S. aid, with two countries signing a memorandum of understanding in 2016, outlining $38 billion in military aid over 10 years could be used here. There's no doubt the impact of debate on the attitudes towards Zionists and on growing concerns about Zionist actions on Netanyahu's right-wing government. It does come there. Jewish people voted Democrat with 71% in 2016 voting for Hillary Clinton, 24% of voting for DJ Trump. In 2015, Trump played into stereotyping, telling a Republican Jewish coalition, "You're not going to support me, but I don't want your money." He equated the anti-Zionist marches in Charlottesville with those who were protesting them, saying they are very fine people on both sides. So that puts kind of the rest of where DJ Trump stands. And from the Jewish community, they view Netanyahu, according to this article, as problematic and oppose some of his policies and his abandonment of a two-state solution. What's so challenging Democratic leaders here is they look at what's happening in Israel, and they see reflections of Trump. As Ben Amin said, this is a strategic blunder of epic proportions that Netanyahu and his advisors have made, turning Israel into a branch of the Republican Party. Well, not only that, the Zionists have been seen with Bolsonaro, the fascists in Brazil, with the fascists in India, the Prime Minister Modi. So, in other words, nothing new there. While I'm here, let me just catch Peter Fonda. He was the star of Easy Rider, died at 79 there. Had a long career. He was the son of Mr. Fonda, Henry Fonda, an actor that had been around for a very, very long time. Easy Rider at that time was $60 million, a lot of money in those days. The box office success. I remember seeing it. And let's see. And they mentioned his sister, Jane Fonda, and the father, all gained critical acclaim in the 70s, but Fonda found himself with films like Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, anyway, and so forth and so on. Fonda showed up with waist-length hair, wearing glasses similar to those of his father, worn in his Oscar-winning performance in On Golden Pond. I remember that one. That was in 1981. So a little bit about, he had some film also about Ulysses. What was that? Portraying Yulee Jackson. Sorry about that, Yulee Jackson. He was born, Peter Henry Fonda was born in 1940 on the 23rd of February in New York City. And of course, by that time, his father had already, Henry had established himself. Period. And anyway, a little biographical stuff there. He attended what is now the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Evidently sent out there to stay with some relatives there in Omaha at the time. And the closing years for Henry Fonda's death. Henry died in 1982, and so forth and so on. I won't go over those situations here. Let's move along here a little bit and see where we are. And there was another article we wanted to bring out here, and as usual, we look and look for things. Incidentally, we're working on an episode on podcasting, and the many podcasts are out there, and a little bit of the numbers behind podcasting and where those things go. And see if we have. Okay, I guess. Okay, we do have a little bit on Rashida Tlaib's grandmother from the New York Post, which is owned, last time I looked, by Rupert Murdoch. Grandmother says she's proud of her wait a minute, just a minute here. She's proud of grandmother of her granddaughter's pro-Palestinian stance. Representative Tlaib's grandmother said that she doesn't understand why her granddaughter was barred from entering Israel, and that she is proud of her pro-Palestinian stance. But typically, I hope I pronounced that right, probably not, the Tlaib, resident of El Faqua at the West Bank, told the Washington Post, who wouldn't be proud of their granddaughter like that? I love her, and I'm so proud of her. She added what was used in what use as being a lawmaker if Tlaib could be barred from Israel. She is in a big position and she cannot visit her grandmother. So what good is the position? She said from her home Friday, apparently before learning that Tlaib had been given a pass but refused to accept it. Tlaib rejected the Zionist's offer to travel to the West Bank to visit her grandmother, saying she would skip it after the Israelis put certain conditions on her, oppressive conditions to humiliate her. She, of course, is from Detroit. And evidently, speaking of weakness, according to this article, Bibi Netanyahu was under pressure from DJ Trump. A day later, Israel decided to allow Tlaib to visit her 90-year-old grandmother. I can't allow the state of Israel to take away that light by humiliating me and using my love for my grandmother to bow down to their oppressive and racist policies. She tweeted using the Arabic, sita, to refer to her grandmother. Silencing me and treating me like a criminal is not what she wants for me. It would kill a piece of her. I have decided that visiting my grandmother on such oppressive conditions stands against everything I believe in, and against racism, oppression, injustice. Tlaib and Omar have voiced support for pro-Palestinian boycott, divestiture, and sanctions movement, which opposes settlements in the West Bank, policies towards Palestinians in on the West Bank and in Gaza. Under the Zionist law, BDS backers can be denied entry to the Zionist state, a move Trump urged in a pair of scathing tweets in which he said the pair of the only Muslim women in Congress hate Jewish people, a charge they deny. It would show a great weakness, if the Zionists allowed Representative Omar and Tlaib to visit. They hate Israel and all Jewish people, and there's nothing. What do you say about his situation? Both are members of the party's progressive wing, along with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York and Ayanna Presley of the Commonwealth there for what's called a squad. And that is a good thing there. Let me just check 1 minute here and make sure we have not missed anything. Occasionally we do miss things. Sometimes there's a story I think we'll save Charlie Cook and Amy Walter for Monday. And this is from The Fix, how a recession could doom DJ Trump's re-election in 2020. This is by Aaron Burke. Bank of America said the odds of a recession next year greater than 30%. Goldman Sachs says a recession risk is rising because of the trade war. A looming recession is not yet a consensus, no doubt about that. But you have to understand that economists, the commercial economists, work at the service of the various capitalist enterprises they represent. Becomes more pitched in the odds of resolution before the 2020, longer and longer. That's from Robert Samuelson. He teaches at the University of Texas, I believe, Austin. But however likely you think it is inescapable fact remains. Politically speaking, a trade war is highly suspect and perhaps unnecessary for him. It's difficult to overstate potential implications. Here are a few historic facts. Since the Civil War, only one president won re-election with a recession occurring in the final 2 calendar years of his term. That was William McKinley in 1900, who was later assassinated. Since then, all 4 presidents running for re-election who have a recession loss to William Howard Taft, Herbert Hoover, Jimmy Carter, and George H.W. Bush. Over the same span, 10 who sought re-election without such a recession won, and that's Woodrow Wilson, of course, FDR, Dwight Eisenhower, Tricky Dick, Reagan, and Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. This would include presidential elections, not just presidents seeking re-election. The party in power, start again here. The party in power has lost 13 of the last 19 races in which there was a recession. Of the 21 without a recession, President's Party has won 16. And the state this recessions within 2 years of presidential races. They go back to 1860. And that was, Election Day, no party held there at that particular time. And we go down, Election Day, no party, that was 2007. That was after 2 terms of G.W. Bush. Barack Obama was running against the late John McCain. As with all historic comparisons involving presidential elections, we're dealing with limited data sets and a whole lot of independent variables, no doubt about that. It's important to look at the context. Recessions were extremely common between the World War, the Civil War, and the Great Depression, or the Depression. As a recession, Trump would seem particularly damaging. His approval rating language in the 40s, and that's where they're lying. But experts have put his re-election hopes somewhere between 50-50 and less. That's the same way we look at it at the Ouija board. That is our model, and we're so polarized. A slight downturn in the economy, and well, anyway, the Freudian slip might not cost him a huge amount of support, especially if he could persuade his supporters to blame the Federal Reserve, which he's already working on. In New Hampshire, he said that, but people have no choice to re-elect him due to their 401ks. But he simply can't afford to lose much of that support. At this point, economic forecasters are even on the right ballpark. It's a huge risk for Trump. Well, there's no doubt about that. A very huge risk for DJ Trump. But once again, the talk of a recession in August of 2019 doesn't mean anything of what will happen in August of 2020. Now, just a brief recession, it would be over by 2020, or more or less over. Now, if you had a depression, then it could linger. And of course, also it's the amount of damage that is done and what states it is done in. And that is really one of the things that you have to constantly monitor. There's no doubt about that. And this is where we have all kinds of problems when we look at these kinds of things that are happening. And it is more and more one of the things. And incidentally, we won't forget about the raids at the plant in Mississippi. These were humongous raids there, and on the 13th, more than 100 workers attended a job fair. Forest, Mississippi, Monday morning in this rural Mississippi town is a state where the poultry industry is one of the biggest drivers of the economy. The Koch Foods is the big plant there. And some of the people there in that town, it's the only thing that's going out. They cite somebody named Noblin, who is an African American, grew up in Mississippi. He wants a more stable job, so he applied at the Koch Foods. This was his fifth time applying, and he's getting back in the process. They're probably desperate, and they will probably take anyone that walks in and can perform the job. That's what my assumption is there. And let me just check something here. Okay, this is where we are. We'll have on the Monday Morning Party Back, we'll look at abortion support. We have some information here, or in a future broadcast we'll look at the measurements for abortion support from PRR.org, the state of abortion and conception attitudes in all of 50 states. This is on the 13th of August, the legality there, and we'll talk a little bit about this, so let me give you, we usually don't do teasers here, but a majority, 54% of Americans believe that abortion should be legal in all, and 23% of most, 31%, while 4 in 10, 40% believe that abortion should be illegal in most, 25% in 15%. These numbers essentially unchanged since 2014, when a similar group, 55% of Americans said abortion should be legal in all, and 21% are 34% in cases, and 4 in 10, so forth and so on. Support of legal abortion is stable from 2014 to 2018. A few states, Alabama and Missouri, have recently passed laws that, should they survive court challenges, would make abortions illegal with virtually no exceptions. And this is where we will leave this particular situation. This will do it for us. We'll return with the Monday Morning Quarterback on this side of the political side. We're still working on the podcasting episode. We'll continue to work on it. And on Numbers Man, we'll look at the farm economy and where it is going in farm country. The survey was done by Creighton University in Nebraska, a small Jesuit college there in Nebraska. This will work with them in the past. Anyway, this is the end. Have a good weekend, everyone. And we'll see you on the Monday Morning Quarterback. We'll be around this weekend on the economic side, Numbers Man for this week in economics. And hopefully we'll get the podcast program in somewhere in between.